and sold him a loaf. Then Mr. Noisy walked along the street to the butcher. He walked into the butcher's shop.
I'd like a piece of meat,
boomed Mr. Noisy to Mr. Paington, the butcher. Mr. Paington trembled and sold him some meat. Afterwards, Mrs. Crumb met Mr. Paington in the street. "We really must do something about Mr. Noisy being so noisy," she said. "Definitely," replied Mr. Paington. "But what?" "I know," said Mrs. Crumb. And she whispered into Mr. Paington's ear. Mr. Paington smiled a small smile, which grew into a broad grin. "Mrs. Crumb," he said, "I think you've got the answer." The following day, Mr. Noisy again went shopping down to Wobbletown. He went into Mrs. Crumb's shop.
I'd like a loaf of bread.
"I'm sorry, what did he say?" asked Mrs. Crumb, pretending not to hear.
I'd like a loaf of bread.
Noisy shouted. "Oh, I'm sorry," said Mrs. Crumb, putting her hand to her ear. Could you speak up a bit, please?"
I'd like a loaf of bread,
roared Mr. Noisy. "I can't hear you," replied Mrs. Crumb. Mr. Noisy gave up and went out. Mr. Noisy went into Mr. Paington's shop.
I'd like a piece of meat.
Mr. Paington pretended not to notice.
I'd like a piece of meat.
Mr. Noisy shouted. "Did he say something?" asked Mr. Paington.
I said I'd like a piece of meat,
roared Mr. Noisy. "Beg your pardon?" Mr. Paington. Mr. Noisy gave up, went out, and went home, and went to bed, hungry. The day after, Mr. Noisy tried again. He went into Mrs. Crumb's shop.
I'd like a loaf of bread.
"A what?" asked Mrs. Crumb. Mr. Noisy started shouting at the very top of his voice.
A loaf of...
Then he stopped. Then he thought. And then he said quietly, "I'd like a loaf of bread, please, Mrs. Crumb." Mrs. Crumb smiled. "Certainly," she said. Then Mr. Noisy went into Mr. Paington's shop.
I'd like a piece of meat.
"Did you say something?" asked Mr. Paington.
Yes, I did,
shouted Mr. Noisy at the very, very top of his voice.
I said I'd like a...
Then he stopped. And then he thought. And then he said quietly, "I'd like a piece of meat, please, Mr. Paington." Mr. Paington smiled. "My pleasure," he said. So, carrying his bread and meat, Mr. Noisy set off home up the hill. And then he stopped. Then he thought. And then do you know what he did? He tiptoed. A tiptoe was something that Mr. Noisy had never tried before. It was fun. And you know something? From then until now, Mr. Noisy isn't anything like as noisy as he used to be. And do you know something else? People of Wobbletown are delighted. Especially Mrs. Crumb, Mr. Paington. And do you know something else? Mr. Noisy has learned how to whisper. Mr. Impossible could do the most amazing... This is the story of Mr. Strong. Mr. Strong is the strongest person in the whole wide world. The strongest person that ever has been, and probably the strongest person that ever will be. He is so strong that he can not only bend an iron bar with his bare hands, he can tie knots. Mr. Strong is so strong, he can throw a cannonball as far as you or I can throw a tennis ball. Mr. Strong is so strong he can hammer nails into a wall just by tapping with his finger. Strong by name and strong by nature. Would you like to know the secret of Mr. Strong's strength? Eggs. The more eggs Mr. Strong eats, the stronger he becomes. Stronger and stronger and stronger. Anyway, this story is about a funny thing that happened to Mr. Strong one day. That morning he was having breakfast. And for breakfast he was having eggs. Followed by eggs. And to finish he was having, guess what? That's right, eggs. That was Mr. Strong's normal breakfast. After his eggy breakfast, Mr. Strong cleaned his teeth. And as usual, he squeezed all the toothpaste out of the tube. And as usual, he cleaned his teeth so hard, he broke his toothbrush. Mr. Strong gets through a lot of toothpaste and toothbrushes. After that, he decided to take a walk. Put on his hat, opened the front door of his house. What a beautiful day, he thought to himself. And stepping outside his house, he shut the front door. The door fell off its hinges. Mr. Strong gets through a lot of front doors. Then Mr. Strong went for his walk. He walked through the woods. But he wasn't looking where he was going. And walked slap bang into a huge tree. The huge tree trunk snapped. The tree thundered to the ground. Whoops, said Mr. Strong. He walked into town. And again, not looking where he was going, he walked slap bang straight to a brick wall. And Mr. Strong, being Mr. Strong, walked straight through that brick wall. Whoops, said Mr. Strong. Eventually, Mr. Strong walked through the town and out into the country, to a farm. The farmer met him in the road, looking very worried. What's the matter? Asked Mr. Strong. It's my cornfield. It's on fire and I can't put it out. Mr. Strong looked over the hedge and sure enough, the cornfield was blazing fiercely. Water, said Mr. Strong. Let's get water to put out the fire. But I don't have enough water to put the whole field out, cried the worried farmer. And the nearest water's down to the river. And I don't have a pond. Then we'll have to find something to carry the water, cried Mr. Strong. Is that your barn? He asked, pointing to a barn in another field. Yes, I was going to put my corn in it, said the farmer. But can I use it? Asked Mr. Strong. Yes, but no buts. Come on. Mr. Strong walked over to the barn, and do you know what he did? He picked it up. He